All right, well, thanks everybody. Again, my apologies for technical issues and for getting us started here a few minutes delayed. We are going to talk about today a very important topic, as Mitch highlighted at the start of the call, and specifically our qualification process for the clients that we work with, and specifically who deserves our time and who doesn't. And so this is going to be a bit of a working session today as we spend some time on that particular topic. And the first thing I want to talk about today is actually the cost of unqualified buyers or the cost of bad leads. Those two kind of go hand in hand. And so I'll start off with a quick question. And I'm going to ask you all in the last 90 days. So as you think about the start of the year, specifically kind of after the holidays when things started to take off from a January perspective up until now, how many buyers did you spend significant time on? And perhaps they didn't close. And I want you to be honest, it's just us today. I'll give you a few categories. Maybe you can drop them in the chat. 0 to 1, 2 to 3, 4 to 5, or 6+ buyers that you spent significant time with over the last 90 days and they didn't close. 2 to 3, 3, 1. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for your transparency and your honesty. And I want everyone to take a second and to really think about this. And this is buyers that maybe they said maybe. You showed them homes, you had calls with them, maybe you wrote an offer for them, and they either vanished, they changed their mind, or it turned out they couldn't qualify, which is an issue of its own. And we, of course, have talked about that in prior sessions as well. So if you were then to multiply that by your hourly value, which we've also talked a little bit about in these sessions, and specifically as you think about what you generally get paid from an average commissions perspective, and then how that translates to an hourly wage. So say anywhere from 50 to $150 an hour, you spend 20 hours on a client, they ghost you. That is, $3,000 perhaps on the higher end of that in lost earnings. And that's just one client. And so today I want to focus on giving you a system that helps to stop donating your best hours to buyers who are never going to close. I'll give you a staggering statistic and then we'll jump into the first segment of today's session. So 73%, 73, almost 3 out of every 4 clients that you talk with, um, these are agents that are working regularly with buyers and they actually were not ready to purchase. So 73% of you all are working with clients that are not truly ready to purchase. Think about that. So saying yes to the wrong person or devoting a lot of time to the wrong person is ultimately also saying no to the right one and the one that you should be working with. All right, so I'm going to talk today in the first segment here regarding a filtering system that I think is going to be helpful to you all as you think about your initial consults, you're having conversations with clients. Very, very simple filtering system that you are able to leverage that should hopefully help in that qualification process. All right. The first filter, and you may want to write this down, but the first filter is motivation. What is motivating your particular client to buy or sell at this time? Is there a life trigger? Is there something that has happened from a job perspective? Have they had a new baby? Is there a divorce? Is there a wedding? Is there a relocation of some sort? And so, really trying to understand what's motivating the client, and then generally a timeline for moving. They obviously are reaching out to you generally, and so you have the opportunity to then qualify them with that first trigger, which again is motivation. What is motivating you to buy or sell right now? All right. Filter number 2 is ability. And this is where, as we reflect back on past sessions and we think about the pre-approval process, getting your client connected with the lender as soon as possible so that you can actually determine what and if they are able to qualify. Do they have a pre-approval in hand? Perhaps they've already worked with another lender. The money from a down payment perspective, where is that coming from? Is that a good source? And then is their credit in an acceptable range? And these are obviously all things that we are able to help from a lending perspective to validate ahead of the process. But again, filter number 2 is their ability to purchase a home or to, sell their home. And then the last filter I'll cover quickly is urgency. And this is a big one. This is one personally where I have recently revised some elements of my specific process to really ensure that I'm focused on giving the client the attention required based on their specific urgency. Are they buying within the next 90 days? Do they have a lease ending soon? We deal with clients that are renters and their lease is ending next month, or perhaps their lease is ending in 6 months and they don't want to break that lease. And so being able to get an idea of what the specific urgency is going to help you as well to figure out from a qualification standpoint what sort of attention you show that client. Maybe they won't give you an answer to that specific timeline. That is technically an answer as well, and helps you as the real estate professional to be able to adjust your process as a result. All right, so I'll recap really quickly those three filters, and then I'm going to ask the audience here which of those you feel you perhaps gravitate to most often. So again, the first was motivation, the second was ability, and then the final filter was the specific urgency for the client. And so, which one do you feel you gravitate to as a real estate professional? And then, is there one that perhaps you commonly skip as a professional? All right, I love it. Thanks so much, everybody, for the feedback. So let's move on to kind of the next segment here, which are ultimately questions that hopefully will give some insight into those specific filters. All right. And we'll start again with motivation. And so as you think about how to probe a little bit with your client and gain an understanding of what is driving their motivation, you could ask questions like, what's making you move right now? Another question that I think is an interesting one is what happens if you don't move right now? Like if this doesn't happen in the next 6 months, what does that mean for you? That will also speak to, again, hopefully trying to focus in on what truly that deep down motivation is for the client. And then you may also ask the client to walk you through what homeownership actually means to them, specifically in the context of doing that now versus waiting. All right. The next filter, again, and some specific questions that can be asked is ability. And so, have you spoken with the lender yet? That is a very common one. Again, you're gonna run into clients that kind of have a host of various steps that they've taken. Maybe they've got a pre-approval already. Maybe they haven't had the very first conversation with the lender that gives you some ability to then determine their ability. All right. Have you identified where your down payment is coming from, or do you have a down payment? That's a very critical question as well as we think about the various programs that we might want to leverage for a given client. And then finally, some questions that you can ask around urgency. When is your ideal closing date? What happens, if you don't close by that date? Again, this can maybe go back to the rental question that I brought up earlier as it relates to a lease ending within the next 30 days, or perhaps, 6 months and the client wants to wait a little bit. And then I think another maybe relevant question for this particular audience is, are you looking at or considering working with other agents? Or have you been working exclusively? Have you been looking at listings, kind of their commitment to you as well? A couple of things that really stood out, and you guys are tapping into my notes already, so that's fantastic. One of the things that I've put together today is a little bit of a cheat sheet. And so I'm going to go through a couple of scenarios, and I am going to give you just the color system: green, yellow, red. Green is obviously good, red is obviously bad. And so these are some specific triggers and filters that you all are already hopefully listening for. And if not, perhaps maybe starting to listen for these as it relates to trying to qualify your particular client. And so if a client called you and they said to you, we need to move in a home, we need to be in a home by March, and that's when our lease is ending, that may be a signal for you, depending on where you are in a given month. So we'll use May for our example, which means you have a little less than 30 days to really get things moving. That's a scenario where you've got to move very quickly. You want to send it to a lender as soon as possible. That's a green from the perspective of qualifying a buyer and determining what level of urgency you give that particular client. Another scenario I think that would fit maybe a green bucket would be we are pre-approved already. We've already spoken with the lender and we are actually ready to write an offer. We love this house and we're ready to move forward right now. That is top of the list, priority number one from a client perspective. So let's get into maybe not as urgent, but perhaps not someone that you should devote less attention to at the outset. We're just casually looking. We don't really have a rush right now. That might be a client that you want to nurture. That's a yellow. Maybe not even showing them homes yet. And the reason I think that this is really important, and I've been guilty of this in the last few weeks, is, as you're working with different clients, sometimes you have some bleed over as it relates to the level of attention you're providing that client. And so in that example, you're working on various things for a given client that has said, I am ready to move forward now. I'm ready to start looking at houses. And then you have that client that just said what I said, we're casually looking. There's not really any rush in this. But if you aren't really paying attention to what they told you in that initial consult, or you're not actually having that discussion to start, the work and the effort can bleed over across those two clients. And you find yourself working just as hard for the client that's already told you that they're not interested in moving forward right now, or they're just casually looking, and perhaps not devoting the attention to the client that is ready to write an offer today if you find them the right house. And so I think it does become really important to make sure we've got systems in place that help us to identify what level of attention should we be devoting to those clients and adjust our process as a result. And sometimes, and I think we've talked about this in prior sessions as well, a client can tell you that they're casually looking, but as things start to move forward, the 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 urgency that they initially communicated evolves a little bit, and they are asking questions like, hey, just checking in for updates, where are we? And again, the time frame that they set, they have a different level of expectation as far as your response to them. All right, I'll give you a couple. These are red, and then we will move on to the next segment in our session today. So maybe you have a client that won't answer any questions about their timeline, or they're just unsure of that. This is a scenario where you likely don't want to show them homes just yet. You may want to pause or requalify them based on what you're picking up from them. Maybe they are they've been looking for 2 years and they haven't purchased anything, or they've worked with 3 other agents already and perhaps decided not to work with them. Those are some red flags that you all may want to consider in your qualification process and adjust your communication level, your level of effort as a result. Before you show your first home to a particular client, you want to ask them about their motivation and their their reason to buy now. So asking about their motivation and their reason to buy right now. The next thing that you want to ask is that you want to confirm and or schedule a lender pre-approval and ensure that they are covering their basis there. Next is an identification of their timeline. When do they want to be closed? When do they want to be in this new home? Down payment source and or down payment assistance needed, I think, is a helpful element as well to confirm. And then obviously super important for you all as real estate professionals is buyer representation agreement. Make sure that you've discussed that and you're working through the process to have that negotiated and completed. All right. Next, we're going to talk about green light criteria, right? So we've talked about the green light from a qualification standpoint as you were having conversations with clients. The first of which is a real life event that is driving the purchase. Is there some deeper motivation for this client to purchase right now? Green light criteria number 2, they've got a pre-approval in hand or they're actively getting one. Maybe they're open to speaking to a lender that you know and trust. That is a criteria for moving forward. Closing timeline within 60 days. And again, these are all, excuse me, 90 days. Actually, I think 60 to 90 days is probably great, but these are all criteria that you are hopefully able to leverage and determine whether or not this client fits that green light criteria and or you need to move them to a different light, if you will, based on the answers that they're giving you. Number four, the client is open to working exclusively with you, or they're committed to working with you. That's obviously green light, and let's move forward. And then the final one is responsiveness. And this is a really important one. They are returning your calls or your text promptly. You don't have to wait 3 days to get a response from them. As an example, that is a scenario where, from a qualification standpoint, this client meets the criteria that we've discussed for a green light. All right, I'm going to take the last couple of minutes and I want to leave you with one thing today. If you perhaps did not take anything else away, I want you to take this away from today's session. And as it relates to qualification, this is not about being cold. It's not about gatekeeping, good service. It's actually the opposite. And this is how you, as a professional, show up as a true professional. This is someone who respects, your time and their time enough to protect it. The buyers ultimately who are serious, they're going to respect you more in the long run for having a process. And I'm sure you all are finding this as well, but clients do appreciate that upfront communication at the start. The ones who don't have that level of respect, I think you then have your answer. And so before our next session, Jonathan, I believe we're going to give some instruction here as it relates to the next few. But before the next session, I encourage you all to use this checklist with your very next lead. Just try it, see how it works. And we would love, as always, to hear any feedback or successes as it relates to that.